The insistent, urgent vibration of the encrypted pager on her hip was a sensation Alana Hayes, regional director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation for the Pacific Northwest, had learned to equate with imminent, unadulterated chaos. She was mid-presentation at the annual Joint Terrorism Task Force Conference in Seattle, her voice a calm, authoritative instrument as she walked the assembled heads of state and local law enforcement agencies through the complex shifting typologies of emerging domestic extremist threats. The discreet, almost imperceptible buzz against her skin, however, cut through her laser-like concentration like a surgeon's scalpel. Protocol, unbending and absolute, dictated that only a Level 1 critical incident, a designation reserved for threats of the highest magnitude, could bypass her chief of staff and trigger a direct page. She paused a fractional hesitation, undetectable to most, then seamlessly transitioned. Ladies and gentlemen, if you'll excuse me for one moment. Deputy Director Carmichael will now elaborate on the current threat matrix for critical infrastructure. With a curt, almost imperceptible nod to her deputy, a man who knew her tells Alana stepped away from the podium. Her heels clicked with sharp, purposeful authority on the polished stage, the collective gaze of 200 law enforcement executives, a sea of expectant faces following her every move. In the hushed, carpeted antechamber, a sterile space smelling faintly of industrial cleaner and stale coffee, she flipped open the pager. The message was stark chilling in its brutal brevity. Active hostage situation, Oakmont Suburban District, juvenile hostage, disabled African-American male. 16 YOA, suspect, female Caucasian HOA, affiliated, local PD on scene requesting immediate FBI assistance, TAC OPS alerted, your eyes only, code red. Oakmont, a quiet, almost aggressively affluent suburb, renowned for its meticulously manicured lawns, its nationally ranked schools, and its almost suffocatingly peaceful insular atmosphere. Not the typical crucible for federal-level crises, but the volatile combination of disabled juvenile, African-American male, and HOA-affiliated suspect sent a jolt of Arctic ice through Alana's veins, a chilling premonition of a volatile, potentially explosive cocktail of deeply ingrained vulnerabilities and simmering unspoken animosities. This wasn't just a crime, it was a societal tinderbox, one spark away from conflagration. Her mind honed over 25 relentless years of navigating the Bureau's treacherous internal politics and the even more perilous external landscapes of organized crime and domestic terror immediately began to dissect the situation, to anticipate the cascading complexities, the potential pitfalls. Get me Agent Reynolds, special agent in charge of the Seattle field office, on a secure line now, she said quietly, her voice a low, controlled hum to the aide who seemed to materialize ghost-like at her elbow. And clear my schedule for the next 72 hours, possibly longer. I'm heading to Oakmont, wheels up in 30. The conference, the carefully prepared speeches, the strategic networking, all of it vaporized instantly, replaced by the singular, overwhelming, urgent imperative of a child in mortal peril. Alana Hayes' daily existence was a relentless, high-stakes juggling act, a high-wire performance, executed with flawless precision over a gaping chasm of potential national and international disasters. As regional director, she wielded authority over all FBI operations across 5 sprawling states, a vast territory encompassing everything from remote snow-choked wilderness areas plagued by heavily armed anti-government militias to gleaming hypermodern tech hubs targeted by sophisticated state-sponsored cyber espionage. Her mornings began before the first hint of dawn, with encrypted secure briefings on overnight developments from around the globe, and more specifically across her region. Her days were a relentless blur of strategic planning sessions that shaped national security policy, brutal budget battles with congressional oversight committees, high-level interagency coordinations that demanded diplomatic finesse and iron will, and the occasional carefully managed press conferences announcing arrests that were the hard-won culmination of months, sometimes years of painstaking, often perilous, undercover investigation. And then there was the quiet, often thankless, deeply personal work of mentoring the next generation of agents, of instilling in them the Bureau's core values of fidelity, bravery, and integrity. She was a Black woman who had shattered countless glass ceilings in a traditionally white, overwhelmingly male-dominated institution, a journey that had demanded not just incandescent brilliance and unwavering, almost fanatical dedication, but a resilience bordering on the superhuman, an ability to absorb blows that would have felled lesser mortals and still rise stronger. She lived alone by choice in a sparsely, almost monastically furnished condominium in the heart of downtown Seattle. Her personal life, a carefully guarded, intensely private space, a necessary, deliberately cultivated counterbalance to the relentless, crushing demands of her very public role. The pressures were immense, almost unimaginable, the stakes invariably terrifyingly sky-high, but Alana thrived on the challenge, fueled by an unshakable, almost spiritual belief in the Bureau's core mission and a fierce, deeply ingrained protective instinct for the innocent, the vulnerable, those who could not protect themselves. Evergreen Meadows, the specific, meticulously planned HOA within Oakmont, where the crisis was rapidly, terrifyingly unfolding, was on its gleaming, perfectly polished surface, the absolute epitome of suburban tranquility and order. Its wide, gracefully curving tree-lined streets, its architecturally harmonious, earth-toned homes, its meticulously tended, flower-choked communal gardens, all spoke of affluence, conformity, and a tightly, almost obsessively controlled aesthetic. But beneath this placid, almost unnervingly perfect veneer, as Alana would soon learn from the rapidly accumulating intelligence, festered a hidden toxic network of petty grievances, simmering deep-seated resentments, and in the particular case of Susan Miller, the HOA's self-appointed and increasingly unhinged enforcer of community standards, a dangerous, pathologically escalating obsession. Miller, a woman in her late 50s, widowed some years prior, with far too much time on her hands and an overinflated, almost grandiose sense of her own importance and moral authority, had become notorious within the confines of Evergreen Meadows for her abrasive confrontational style, her endless nitpicking stream of officious complaints about the most trivial perceived infractions, and her particular unrelenting and deeply unsettling focus on the Washington family. The Washingtons, Lena, a pediatric nurse with a quiet strength, and her husband Mark, an engineer, had moved into Evergreen Meadows 2 years prior, drawn by the promise of a safe, supportive neighborhood, and critically its proximity to a renowned nearby clinic specializing in complex developmental disorders. Their son, Marcus, was 16, a bright, deeply engaging teenager who possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of jazz music and a passionate, almost reverent love for astrophysics. He dreamed Lena would later tell Alana, her voice thick with tears, of becoming an astronaut, of touching the stars. Marcus also lived with a complex, often challenging set of neurodevelopmental differences. He was on the autism spectrum, which sometimes manifested in repetitive behaviors or vocalizations, particularly when he was overwhelmed or experiencing sensory overload, and he had type 1 diabetes, a condition that required constant, careful monitoring and precisely timed regular insulin injections. Susan Miller, from her powerful self-anointed perch as head of the HOA's Architectural Review and Neighborhood Harmony Committee, had apparently decided with chilling certitude that Marcus, and by extension, his entire family, did not fit into her idealized, rigidly defined vision of Evergreen Meadows. At first, she'd feigned a cloying, solicitous concern, inviting Lena for tea, offering unsolicited advice on managing Marcus' suggestions, laced with thinly veiled judgments about his unpredictability. It's just about maintaining the neighborhood's serenity. "Dear," Miller had said, her smile never quite reaching her cold, assessing eyes, "some children, you know, require a more structured environment, for their own good and for the peace of mind of everyone." When her subtle manipulations failed to yield the Washingtons' departure, the overt complaints began. Notes about the precise height of their lawn, the exact placement of their recycling bins on collection day. Then, inevitably, they had escalated, becoming more personal, more pointed. Miller had lodged formal written grievances about Marcus's disturbing noises and erratic behaviors when he played in his own backyard, deliberately misinterpreting his joyful exclamations or occasional anxious vocalizations during moments of sensory overload as deliberate provocations, as acts of defiance. She had venomously accused the Washingtons of blatantly neglecting community aesthetics and reducing property values when they installed a small, unobtrusive, medically necessary ramp to their front door for Marcus's occasional wheelchair use during periods when his diabetes affected his mobility. She had even, with breathtaking audacity, attempted to rally other residents to sign a petition demanding the Washingtons control their son more effectively or face escalating HOA sanctions and fines. Most residents, to their credit, had ignored her, embarrassed and repulsed by her overt hostility and thinly veiled prejudice. But a few Alana's initial, rapidly compiled intelligence briefing starkly revealed a small insular clique within the HOA had quietly, insidiously enabled Miller's escalating vendetta, echoing her concerns about standards and maintaining the character of the neighborhood. Lena Washington had tried repeatedly to reason with Miller, had patiently attempted to explain Marcus's unique needs, his autism, his diabetes. But her calm, rational explanations had been met with a cold, unyielding wall of suspicion, thinly veiled prejudice, and a chilling, dismissive condescension. Miller often invoked the name of Arthur Jenkins, the HOA's controversial founder from decades past. Mr. Jenkins had a vision for evergreen meadows, Miller would say at HOA meetings, her voice ringing with conviction. A vision of order, of harmony. Some people just don't respect that vision. The inciting incident, the final irrevocable spark that had ignited Susan Miller's simmering pathological resentment into a full-blown, life-threatening federal crisis, had occurred earlier that morning. According to a frantic, almost incoherent, tearful Mrs. Washington interviewed by the first responding local police officers, Miller had been particularly agitated, almost vibrating with suppressed rage for the past week, ever since the HOA board, under pressure from more reasonable residents, had formally and very publicly dismissed her latest, most outrageous petition against the Washingtons for lack of merit and demonstrable bias. That morning, Marcus had been home alone for a brief, carefully planned period, less than an hour, waiting for his mother to return from a quick essential errand before a scheduled critical clinic appointment. He was in their own front yard, a space he considered his sanctuary, listening to John Coltrane on his headphones, completely absorbed in a lavishly illustrated book about distant nebulae and galaxies. Susan Miller, who lived directly across the street, her windows like vacant eyes, staring at the Washington home, had apparently seen her opportunity, her moment. She had marched with rigid, determined steps across her own perfectly manicured, chemically treated lawn, confronted Marcus, and according to a terrified elderly neighbor who had witnessed the initial horrifying interaction, from behind a hastily drawn curtained window began screaming at him, her voice a shrill, piercing harangue about flagrant HOA violations, his unacceptable disruptive public behavior, and his deliberate defiance of community standards. Marcus, startled, overwhelmed, and terrified by the sudden, aggressive, unprovoked onslaught, had evidently experienced a severe sensory meltdown, a common involuntary occurrence for many individuals on the autism spectrum when faced with intense, unexpected, and hostile stimuli. He had started to rock back and forth, to hum loudly his usual ingrained coping mechanisms, kicking in his hands, flapping. Miller, in her profoundly ignorant, prejudiced, and dangerously distorted worldview, had clearly catastrophically misinterpreted this as defiance, as aggression, as a threat. She had grabbed Marcus forcefully by the arm, her fingers digging into his flesh, physically overpowering the disoriented, terrified teenager, and dragged him struggling, crying out, and utterly petrified into her own house. A few minutes later, Susan Miller herself had dialed 911. Her voice on the recorded call, which Alana listened to with a mounting sense of cold, sickening dread, as her FBI helicopter raced towards Oakmont Roaders, thumping a grim rhythm against the sky, was a bizarre, chilling, almost surreal mixture of hysterical agitation and unnervingly calm, almost self-congratulatory pronouncements. She had declared with a chilling, righteous conviction that she was detaining a neighborhood delinquent, that he was a clear and present danger to community safety and property values, that she had taken him into protective custody for his own good and the good of the neighborhood, and that she would not release him until the police, and specifically the Washington family, met her non-negotiable demands for neighborhood order and compliance. She had also stated with ominous, chilling finality that she was fully prepared to defend her home, her principles, and her community standards by any and all means necessary. She had taken a disabled, vulnerable black teenager hostage, barricaded herself inside her suburban home, and the fuse on a major, potentially explosive federal crisis was irrevocably lit. The first wave of rising action commenced the precise moment Alana's FBI helicopter, A sleek, dark bird of prey touched down with a wind-whipping flurry at the ad hoc, rapidly expanding command post being established by local law enforcement at a deserted strip mall a strategic quarter-mile from the Evergreen Meadows perimeter. The scene was one of barely controlled chaos, an adrenaline-fueled ballet of flashing lights, and urgent crackling radio traffic. Oakmont PD, to their credit, had done a commendable job establishing an initial, albeit porous, perimeter, evacuating the immediate neighboring houses, and attempting unsuccessfully to open a coherent line of communication with Susan Miller. But they were clearly understandably out of their depth, unequipped to handle a crisis of this complexity and volatility. Miller was by all accounts irrational, paranoid, refusing to speak to local negotiators, and had reportedly been seen at an upstairs window, brandishing what looked like a large, gleaming kitchen knife. Marcus's mother, Lena Washington, was at the command post, her face a mask of raw, unimaginable anguish, her body trembling uncontrollably as she pleaded, her voice hoarse and cracking, with anyone who would listen for news of her son for any sign of hope. Alana, her expression a carefully constructed mask of calm authority, but her eyes, reflecting the grim, stark reality of the unfolding situation, immediately decisively took charge. "This is now a federal investigation," she announced to the assembled, visibly stressed local police chief and his command staff, her voice, though quiet, cutting through the nervous tension in the cramped makeshift command room like a razor. Special Agent in Charge Reynolds from our Seattle field office is en route to assume tactical command of this scene. The FBI's elite hostage rescue team is mobilizing out of Quantico ETA approximately 4 hours, possibly less, with priority air clearance. Until their arrival, our regional SWAT asset, which is already airborne, and minutes out will be primary tactical. I want every available piece of intelligence on Susan Miller, her complete background, any known mental health history, however minor any known, associates past or present detailed layouts of her home, including any recent modifications. And I want a dedicated, experienced FBI crisis negotiator on that line with her now. What are her specific demands as of this moment? A harried, pale-faced Oakmont police captain, his uniform rumpled, his eyes bloodshot, spoke up, his voice strained. "Ma'am, Director Hayes, so far they're nonsensical, delusional. She wants the Washington family to sign a legally binding document notarized promising to vacate Evergreen Meadows within 30 days. She demands a public written apology from the entire HOA board for not upholding her previous numerous complaints against them. She wants Marcus to be immediately sent to what she called a specialized residential facility for disruptive and unmanageable youths. She also mentioned, almost as an aside, something about financial reparations for demonstrable property value decline she claims the Washingtons have caused the neighborhood." Alana felt a surge of icy, controlled fury. The sheer breathtaking arrogance, the blatant, unadulterated racism and ableism masquerading as legitimate neighborhood concern, the grotesque weaponization of petty HOA rules to justify a heinous federal crime. It was almost beyond rational comprehension. But her face remained impassive, a mask of steely resolve. What about the hostage, Marcus Washington? What's his current condition? His specific medical needs? Has she made any statements about his well-being? Lena Washington, overhearing the exchange, her senses preternaturally sharpened by terror, pushed past a uniformed officer, her eyes wild, pleading, locking onto Alana's. Director Hayes, please. He needs his insulin. He's a type 1 diabetic. His blood sugar, if he doesn't get his scheduled shot, his next one is due by noon. He could go into diabetic ketoacidosis. He could die. Please, you have to tell her. You have to make her understand he needs his medicine. It was 10:30 a.m. The clock was ticking a relentless, merciless countdown, not just on the delicate art of negotiation, but on Marcus's very life. This deliberate, calculated denial of life-saving medical care to a vulnerable, terrified hostage was the first truly shocking, undeniable escalation, transforming what might have seemed a bizarre, localized dispute into an act of calculated, potentially lethal cruelty. The second shocking, deeply disturbing element of the rising action unfolded as the FBI's formidable, far-reaching resources began to peel back the layers of Susan Miller's apparently unremarkable life. She had no significant prior criminal record, but a deep, rapid dive into voluminous civil court records, archived HOA meeting minutes, and online neighborhood forums revealed a disturbing, deeply entrenched pattern of escalating aggression, obsessive behavior, and vexatious, often frivolous litigation. She had sued neighbors over barking dogs, over the precise shade of their window shutters, over children's play equipment she deemed unsightly or out of character with the neighborhood's aesthetic. Investigators uncovered a documented history of her making racially charged, subtly coded comments at numerous HOA meetings, thinly veiled remarks about preserving the unique character of our neighborhood, maintaining our shared values, and guarding against certain elements that might not fully appreciate or fit in with our community's established lifestyle. Several former neighbors contacted by diligent agents fanning out across the state described her with chilling consistency as bitter, vindictive, isolated, and obsessed with control and her own perceived authority. One former friend, estranged for years after a bitter falling out over Miller's increasingly erratic behavior, reluctantly, fearfully told investigators that Miller owned a small handgun, a .38 revolver her late husband had kept in a nightstand drawer, and that she definitely knew how to use it, having taken a concealed carry class years ago, though her permit had long since expired. The large kitchen knife seen at the window was not, it seemed, her only potential weapon. Then a crucial piece of intelligence. A search of Miller's recently impounded vehicle revealed printouts of articles detailing other HOA disputes that had escalated to violence, and chillingly, a list of names. Other families of color or with disabled children in Evergreen Meadows. Negotiations initiated by the FBI's lead crisis negotiator, Special Agent David Ramirez, a man renowned for his preternatural calm and his uncanny ability to talk down even the most hardened violent criminals, were proving exceptionally frustratingly difficult. Susan Miller was by turns hysterical, self-pitying, belligerently self-righteous, and unnervingly lucid in her recitation of perceived slights. She ranted endlessly about disrespect, about the complete breakdown of order and decency, about her sacrosanct rights as a homeowner and a concerned citizen. She steadfastly refused to acknowledge the gravity, the criminality of her actions, repeatedly chillingly referring to Marcus not as a hostage, but as a detainee, whom she was protecting from his own family's clear negligence and inability to cope. She made absolutely no concessions, refused to allow food, water, or most critically, Marcus's life-sustaining insulin to be sent into the house. Each calm, patient plea from Agent Ramirez for Marcus's well-being, for basic human decency, was met with a fresh, vitriolic tirade about HOA bylaws, a demand for the Washington's immediate eviction, or a rambling, incoherent discourse on the importance of maintaining standards. Surveillance teams using high-powered optics and discreetly placed highly sensitive microphones painted a grim, increasingly desperate picture of the interior of Miller's meticulously neat, yet somehow menacing home. Marcus was clearly terrified, huddled in a corner of the living room, rocking almost imperceptibly, while Miller paced erratically, a caged animal, sometimes muttering angrily to herself, sometimes shouting abuse at Marcus, the knife still visible, a glint of silver, either clutched in her hand or lying menacingly on a nearby coffee table. Then came the midpoint twist, a development that ratcheted the already unbearable suffocating tension to a new terrifying and far more complex level. During a brief, seemingly calmer moment in the protracted negotiations, Susan Miller made a new, utterly bizarre, and deeply unsettling demand. "I want to speak to Arthur Jenkins," she stated, her voice suddenly flat, devoid of its earlier hysteria, chillingly calm. "The former president of the Evergreen Meadows HOA, the founder. I want him brought here, now. He'll understand. He knows what needs to be done to restore order. He always did." Arthur Jenkins. The name sent a flurry of frantic activity through the analysts and intelligence officers gathered at the command post. Jenkins had been the founding HOA president decades ago, a deeply controversial autocratic figure who had resigned amidst a storm of allegations of financial impropriety, intimidation tactics, and abusive conduct towards residents who dared to challenge his authority. He had no current official connection to Evergreen. Meadows had reportedly moved out of state years ago. Why him? What did Miller believe he, a man long gone from power, could possibly do? Was he some unknown shadowy accomplice, a mentor in her twisted, hateful ideology? Or was this a definitive sign of a complete psychotic break, her demands spiraling further into pure, untethered delusion. Then a piece of truly chilling intelligence came in from the technical surveillance team, a dedicated unit working tirelessly to penetrate the secrets of Miller's home. They had managed to get a faint, intermittent audio feed from a highly sensitive microphone placed near a ventilation duct on Miller's house. Through the crackle of static, they had picked up snippets of Miller talking not to Marcus, but apparently to herself, or more chillingly, to an unseen, unheard third party. She was referencing the Evergreen Purity Pact, talking about activating Phase 2 and making cryptic, deeply disturbing statements about cleansing the neighborhood for good, making sure only the right kind of people feel welcome here, and fulfilling Arthur's true vision. This wasn't just about the Washingtons anymore. This wasn't a spontaneous act of a frustrated, mentally unstable woman who had finally snapped. The mention of a pact, of a Phase 2, of Arthur's true vision, strongly suggested premeditation, a broader, potentially far more violent, ideologically driven agenda. An urgent call came from SAC Reynolds. "Alana, we just got a hit on Jenkins. He died 3 years ago. Heart attack." Simultaneously, an analyst flagged a name from Miller's recovered list, Daniel Schreiber, a current HOA board member known for his hardline views and vocal support of Miller's past complaints. A quick check revealed Schreiber lived 2 streets over from Miller. "Get a team to Schreiber's house discreetly," Alana ordered. "I want to know if he's home." The realization hit Alana Hayes with the force of a physical blow. Susan Miller wasn't just an unstable woman with a knife and a distorted sense of grievance. She was potentially a calculating, ideologically motivated domestic extremist, a key figure in a small local hate group who had carefully, meticulously planned this confrontation. And her ultimate intentions might be far deadlier, far more widespread than they had initially terrifyingly imagined. The hostage situation was now unequivocally viewed through the chilling high-stakes lens of a potential domestic terrorism event. This wasn't just one woman. This was a conspiracy. Just then, Alana's secure phone buzzed. An untraceable number, a synthesized voice, cold and metallic. "Director Hayes, Susan Miller is a soldier for community purity. Arthur Jenkins laid the foundation. We continue his work. There are deterrents around the neighborhood. If HRT makes a move before our demands are met, or if Susan is harmed, Evergreen Meadows will learn the true price of disorder. Release Susan. The Washingtons leave, or the boy, and then others will pay. You have 1 hour to comply with Susan's primary demands regarding the Washingtons." The line went dead. Deterrents. Explosives. This changed everything. The local PD confirmed Schreiber wasn't home. His car was gone. The climax was reached as the oppressive afternoon sun began its slow, agonizing descent, casting long, ominous, blood-red shadows across the once peaceful streets of Evergreen Meadows. Marcus had now been without his life-sustaining insulin for nearly 6 hours. His noon dose was long past. Mrs. Washington, her face etched with an almost unbearable grief, a living portrait of maternal terror, had to be physically supported by an FBI victim specialist, her legs threatening to buckle. Agent Ramirez's negotiations with Susan Miller had completely irrevocably stalled. Miller had become increasingly agitated, her responses more fragmented, paranoid, and violent, especially after being informed a calculated risk by Ramirez that Arthur Jenkins was deceased. She had begun to issue direct, unequivocal threats against Marcus, her voice rising to a shrill, terrifying ultimatum. "If my demands are not met in 1 hour," she had shrieked, her voice captured with chilling clarity on the open phone line, the sound amplified in the tense command post. "If you don't get those people, those undesirables out of my neighborhood, then this boy will pay the full price for their arrogance and your incompetence. I swear to God I'll do it. I'll make a goddamn example of him that this whole town will never forget." 1 hour. It was 2:00 p.m. The deadline from the synthesized voice coincided. Alana Hayes. Her expression a grim, unreadable mask of command. Her mind racing through 1,000 impossible calculations, convened an emergency huddle with SAC Reynolds, the HRT commander who had arrived ahead of his main team and was now on site, a reassuringly solid presence, and the EOD Explosive Ordnance Disposal team leader. The options were stark, the risks monumental, almost unthinkable. "She's devolved completely," Alana stated, her voice low, clipped, devoid of all emotion. Rational negotiation is no longer a viable option. We have credible direct threats against the hostage's life. His medical condition is critical, deteriorating by the minute. We have a credible external threat of IEDs, likely targeting our access or egress. We are out of time on all fronts. She looked directly at the HRT commander. What are your breach options considering the internal and external threats? What's the revised risk assessment to the hostage? The commander, a seasoned veteran of countless high stakes, no-fail entries, his face grim, laid out the revised, incredibly risky plan. A dynamic multi-point breach, overwhelming force, speed, and absolute surprise, designed to neutralize the primary threat, Miller, and secure the hostage in seconds. Simultaneously, EOD teams would attempt to identify and neutralize any perimeter devices, working under the assumption that the accomplice S might trigger them if a breach commenced. The risk to Marcus was now significantly higher, almost unacceptably so. But the risk of inaction, Alana knew with chilling certainty, was now far greater. She made the agonizing, necessary, potentially career-ending call. Execute, EOD, you have a green light for perimeter sweep and neutralization. HRT breach on my signal pending EOD assessment of immediate entry path safety. Suddenly a shot rang out from Miller's house, not directed outward, but a muffled crack from within. Then Miller's voice on the open line, laced with a terrifying new calmness. He tried to run. He won't try again. I've moved him. You'll never get to him in time. Your hour is almost up. She'd fired a warning shot, or worse, and dragged Marcus deeper into the house, to a more fortified position, perhaps a windowless bathroom or closet. Alana took a deep breath. Ramirez, tell her I'm coming in, unarmed, to talk, to ensure Marcus gets his insulin. Just me. This was against every protocol, but the internal dynamic had shifted. The external threat remained, but the immediate internal one had escalated. The HRT commander protested vehemently. Director, absolutely not. It's the only way to de-escalate her enough for you to get a clean shot or a safe entry if she refuses. Buy EOD time. Buy Marcus time. Alana was already stripping off her jacket, her sidearm. Reynolds, you have command. If I'm not out, or if you don't hear from me in 10 minutes, or if she harms me, HRT goes, EOD cover be damned. The next few minutes unfolded in a surreal, terrifying, almost slow-motion ballet of controlled, calculated violence and unimaginable bravery. Alana, unarmed, walked slowly towards the house hands, visible Ramirez trying to keep Miller on the line, explaining the director was approaching. EOD teams, like specters in their heavy blast suits, swept the immediate perimeter, identifying 2 pressure plate IEDs near the front walkway, clearly designed to target first responders. As Alana reached the porch, Miller screamed from inside, "No closer, or he dies now." Susan, Alana called, her voice amplified by a small handheld unit. "I just want to make sure Marcus is okay. Let me see him. Let me give him his medicine." The door opened a crack. Miller's wild eyes, the glint of the knife. "The medicine. Slide it over." Alana complied, pushing a small kit containing insulin and a syringe across the porch. As Miller bent, slightly distracted HRT, having silently bypassed the now identified IEDs at the front by using a side approach, cleared scant seconds before by EOD initiated their breach. Not with explosives, but with a silent hydraulic door spreader on a rear kitchen door. Diversionary devices, flashbangs, exploded at the front of the house, drawing Miller's attention away from Alana and the insulin. Simultaneously, the breachers were in. Shouts of, "FBI, get down," echoed from within. Through the still open negotiation line, Alana heard Miller scream a sound of pure animalistic rage and utter surprise, then a sickening thud, then a brief, desperate struggle, then blessed, profound silence, broken only by the authoritative, clipped commands of the HRT operators. "Suspect down, suspect in custody, hostage is secure, hostage is alive." Then the words Alana Hayes had been praying, bargaining with God, to hear, "Medics clear to enter. We have Marcus. He's conscious, very weak, but alive." A second FBI team, acting on a hunch from Alana, converged on Daniel Schreiber's home, just as he was attempting to flee a remote detonator for other devices found in his vehicle. The Evergreen Purity Pact was wider than just Miller. The falling action began with the almost anticlimactic, yet deeply satisfying sight of Susan Miller, disheveled, wild-eyed, spitting, and securely handcuffed, being frog-marched out of her house by two imposing HRT operators. She was screaming obscenities, still ranting about property rights, neighborhood purity, and traitors. Marcus, pale, trembling, disoriented but miraculously unharmed, beyond a few minor bruises from Miller's initial assault and subsequent restraint, was carried out carefully by a tactical medic, his mother rushing to his side, their reunion a raw, powerful, almost silent explosion of tears, and whispered words of love and reassurance that brought a lump to even the most hardened throats at the command post. He was immediately administered glucagon, and then his life-saving insulin, his blood sugar dangerously critically high, but stabilized by the swift, expert medical intervention. The large kitchen knife was recovered from the living room coffee table. The .38 revolver, fully loaded, was found under a sofa cushion in the barricaded back bedroom, easily within Miller's reach. Daniel Schreiber and two other HOA members, identified from documents in Miller's home, and Schreiber's frantic confession, were taken into custody within the hour, their network of hate dismantled. Susan Miller and her co-conspirators were transported to federal holding, where they were charged with a litany of serious federal offenses, kidnapping, conspiracy to interfere with housing rights under the Fair Housing Act, due to the clear racial and disability-based animus assault with a deadly weapon, use of explosive devices in commission of a felony, and interstate transmission of threats. The FBI's investigation into the Evergreen Purity Pact and Phase 2 continued, revealing a cache of documents in Miller's and Schreiber's homes, detailing a more extensive, chilling campaign of harassment, intimidation, and planned violence they had intended to launch against other families in Evergreen Meadows and surrounding communities whom they deemed undesirable. Their notes indicated a disturbing level of planning, a deep-seated violent ideology rooted in extremist interpretations of community values and a warped sense of entitlement. The community of Evergreen Meadows was thrown into profound, soul-searching turmoil. Residents expressed shock, horror, disbelief, and a deep, pervasive sense of collective guilt for not having recognized, or for having willfully ignored, or for not having adequately addressed Susan Miller's and her clique's escalating pattern of harassment, bigotry, and growing instability. The entire HOA board resigned en masse. Public meetings were held filled with raw, unfiltered emotion, painful, difficult conversations about prejudice, complicity, community responsibility, and a shared, fragile determination to ensure such a thing could never ever happen again. Some residents, however, quietly defended Miller's intentions, highlighting the deep schisms. For Alana Hayes, the successful rescue of Marcus Washington and the dismantling of a domestic terror cell was a significant, hard-won victory, but it was also a stark, chilling reminder of the insidious, often hidden threats lurking beneath the surface of even the most seemingly placid, ordinary American communities. The confluence of factors in this case, the virulent racial animus, the victim's disability, the weaponization of HOA regulations, the perpetrator's clear mental instability, dangerously combined with cold premeditation and ideological fervor, highlighted critical, dangerous gaps in how law enforcement and society at large identified, understood, and addressed such complex, intersecting forms of targeted violence and homegrown extremism. The resolution was far-reaching a testament to the gravity of the events. The prosecution of Susan Miller, Daniel Schreiber, and their associates became a landmark case. The overwhelming evidence of their racially motivated harassment, their conspiracy, their use of IEDs, coupled with the extreme violence of their actions, led to swift convictions on all counts, including federal hate crime and domestic terrorism charges, which Alana had passionately, relentlessly insisted the U.S. attorney pursue. Miller and Schreiber received sentences of life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Their accomplices received lengthy sentences. More significantly, the Oakmont hostage crisis, as it came to be widely known, became a powerful, undeniable catalyst for national policy changes and a painful national conversation. Director Alana Hayes, leveraging the high-profile nature of the case, her own unassailable credibility, and her considerable influence within the Beltway, personally spearheaded a determined, unyielding push for comprehensive reform. She testified before multiple congressional committees, her calm, authoritative, deeply informed testimony, detailing the systemic failures that had allowed Miller's hate group to fester and escalate unchecked, and the specific acute vulnerabilities faced by minority families and individuals with disabilities in HOA-governed communities across the nation. Her meticulously crafted recommendations, backed by a broad, diverse coalition of civil rights organizations, disability advocacy groups, and major law enforcement agencies, led to the historic passage of the Marcus Washington Safe Communities and Fair Housing Act. This landmark legislation significantly strengthened federal protections against harassment, discrimination, and domestic terrorism in housing, provided new powerful tools and resources for the FBI to investigate and prosecute HOA-related hate crimes and extremist cells, mandated specialized intensive training for local law enforcement in recognizing and responding to bias-motivated incidents and hostage situations involving vulnerable individuals, and established a permanent national task force, which Alana was asked and agreed to co-chair, dedicated to developing and implementing best practices for fostering inclusive, equitable, and safe community governance nationwide. The Washington family, though deeply irrevocably scarred by their terrifying ordeal, slowly painstakingly began to heal. Marcus, with the unwavering fierce love and support of his family and a chastened, truly repentant segment of his community, showed remarkable, inspiring resilience. He returned to his profound love of jazz and astrophysics, his quiet courage, his gentle spirit, an unspoken inspiration to many. He still had nightmares, Lena confided in Alana months later, but he was also relearning to trust, to find joy. Lena Washington, transformed by her trauma, became a powerful, articulate, and deeply respected advocate for victims of neighborhood harassment, racial discrimination, and domestic extremism, her voice adding a vital, unignorable perspective to the ongoing national conversation. Evergreen Meadows, humbled, shamed, and ultimately transformed, embarked on a long, difficult, but genuine journey of introspection, reconciliation, and systemic reform, working diligently, if imperfectly, to create a truly inclusive, equitable, and welcoming environment for all. Alana Hayes, watching the news reports of these positive, hard-won changes from her Spartan office in Seattle, allowed herself a rare, fleeting, deeply private moment of profound satisfaction. The fight against hatred, bigotry, and violence was a relentless, unending, often disheartening one she knew better than anyone. But sometimes, just sometimes, out of the searing crucible of a terrible, unimaginable crisis, came the opportunity, the sacred obligation, to forge something better, something stronger, something more, just more human. The rescue of Marcus Washington had not just saved one remarkable boy's life, it had ignited a movement, a nationwide reckoning that promised a safer, more equitable future for countless others. One afternoon, a small, carefully wrapped package arrived at Alana's office. Inside was a rare John Coltrane vinyl and a simple handwritten card from Marcus. Director Hayes, thank you for saving my stars. Keep listening, Marcus W. And that Alana knew, her eyes unexpectedly moist, was a victory worth every sleepless night, every impossible decision, every ounce of her being. She poured day after grueling day into the demanding, imperfect, but ultimately vital mission of the Federal Bureau of Investigation.